Mark Hill from Greenleys. So this is a reaction to Theresa May's latest announcement that she is going to be taking the withdrawal treaty back to the Commons yet again, this time potentially with the customs union bolted on, at least temporarily. Now, this isn't a good deal. It remains a poor deal, but it's also historically absolutely continuous with the way that the EU has always ever treated the Conservatives. Almost by definition, a deal coming out of the EU has always ever been a bad deal. Cast your minds back. 1992, general election. Major manages to win the general election very much against what was popularly felt to be the likely result, against Neil Kinnock. And then is faced with 5 years of nightmare with the European Union. Firstly, Black Wednesday, when Britain got kicked out of the exchange rate mechanism, and Major was subsequently forced to change his Chancellor. Then in 1994, the Maastricht Treaty started, and that was to give sweeping new powers to the European Union, which effectively ended up being defeated by other changes, other governments that decided to have referenda. But the Maastricht Treaty was still something that had to be passed line by line by the Commons because it was a constitutional treaty. It inspired multiple government defeats and eventually the formation of the Referendum Party in 1997, which went on to destroy the Conservatives in the 1997 election. Everybody thinks of the referendum of the 97 as being Tony Blair's victory, but effectively it was the Tory party's defeat, handsome defeat, actually at the hands of Goldsmith and the Referendum Party, which then led to the Lisbon Treaty, which again was very difficult for the British and the British Conservatives. And the Lisbon Treaty eventually passed by the new Labour government. There were the 5 tests as to whether or not we would join the euro. Those weren't met. The threat of a referendum on membership of the euro also helped defeat the British membership of the euro, and the fact that we've been kicked out of the ERM, which actually was a blessing in disguise. 2004, you've got the Anti-Maastricht Alliance, which is now a cross-party campaign, which is campaigning for a referendum. You've got the 2007 Lisbon Treaty. All of these being directed against the British government by the EU. In 2010, the government changes again. This time we've got David Cameron, who's pledged not to discuss Europe, at least not too much. And for 5 years he manages to steer largely clear. But then in 2015, as a result of the general election, where he pledged to hold an in-out referendum, which appeared to be a wise move at the general election, which it probably won him that 15 general election, the 16 referendum, and ever since then, yet again, we've had very difficult treaty options given to us by the European Union. Why do British Conservatives trust the European Union at all? Why do they trust it to give us ever a deal that's ever worth taking? Hasn't the British Conservative Party in particular been at the receiving end of so many bad EU treaties, which they've had to subsequently try and palm off to the British electorate, and particularly the Conservative voting part of the electorate? Why do they trust the EU to have devised a treaty which Theresa May is now proposing, which is worth the signing? Why is everybody in the Conservative Party hierarchy so convinced that Britain has to leave with a deal, and that deal is essentially therefore set by the European Union because, as it turns out, we appear not to be able to leave with no deal? It's always ever been expedient, and the EU has been comparatively well organised and has offered us treaties which are poor, but ultimately we've almost as a country, been shamed into signing these stupid things. And here we are yet again, going to be considering in June yet another version of Theresa May's deal, this time with customs union added on, which actually removes much of the point of being separate from the European Union, because it removes our separate commercial trade policy and therefore our standards. I wonder if part of the reason is actually the expedience. It's always been the case that the Tories have felt half-hearted about the European Union, and therefore haven't prepared very well for it and dealing with it. And therefore, no deal is actually more a matter of covering the arses of those Tory politicians like Whittington, Philip Hammond, the Chancellor, and Theresa May, who have made no preparation for leaving without a deal, and therefore say that we can't leave without a deal because it would expose them for the incompetent ministers that they are.